Boa noite. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the series Brazil, 200 Years of Independence, History, Language, and Culture. Topic this week is Brazil, 200 Years of Economic Development and the Few Crises. And our presenter is well known as Dr. Elaine Rocha from the University of the West Indies, Asia campus. And I am Marco Schaumloeffel. I teach Portuguese at the Barbados Language Centre, Barbados Community College. So this presentation is brought to you by the Embassy of Brazil in Bridgetown and the Barbados Language Centre, Barbados Community College. Welcome all. Good evening, Dr. Rocha. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to come back and talk. It's gonna be good.
So we obviously should be happy because Brazil had its debut today in the World Cup and they won. So
yay! I didn't know I was teaching. Yay! That's so wonderful.
yeah, we won 2-0 against Serbia. Richarlison scored twice, and the second goal was a wonderful one. Okay, so far, because we are the country of football too, not only the country of carnival and so on. Yeah, Dr. Rocha, we spoke, you already had 2 presentations here. Everyone is familiar with your face. And you spoke in the first presentation about the things that led to the independence of Brazil. And later you spoke more or less focusing on the moments that when the independence happened. And now, I think today you will talk about the developments after the independence up to today in Brazil. So, yes, the floor is yours, and let's listen to your presentation. And as usual, if anyone wants to ask questions, you can interrupt if something is not clear or you would like to complement something. This also is not just a formal presentation; it also can be a kind of conversation. Yes, Dr. Rocha, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm gonna start by sharing my screen. Let's see, it's loading. Today the internet is particularly, can you see my screen?
Not yet, but sometimes it takes a little bit to come up.
Yeah, it's not supposed to be this way. It's kind of slow. I don't know why.
Yeah, well, just press the button share, and then I guess it will come up, even if it takes a little bit.
Okay, it's asking how I want this to happen.
Share screen. Share screen is usually the next.
Yeah, let me see.
That's...
But I want a particular window that's not showing here. Ah, wait. Some too many windows open here. But my computer no, but here it is. Okay, there we go. No. Yes. So
Okay, yes, we can see. You can see your screen. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good.
Now we are going to talk about what happened after, because last time we spoke, it was the tropical empire, how Brazil created an empire, and it's the only monarchy in the Americas that existed. And what happened after? That's right. So the Brazilian economy, just to work with your memory, the Brazilian economy in the 19th century was still preeminently agricultural. We had different types of plantations. We had coffee plantation, we had cotton plantation, we had sugarcane plantation, and the mills. But we also had, at the same time, we had a strong production of minerals. We spoke about gold, some silver, not as much, but minerals like precious stones and other minerals that are important for the economy were being found in Brazil. One of them was the production of coal, which we spoke about. Some slaves in the southern uh, part of Brazil found this coal mine in Rio de Janeiro, in Rio Grande do Sul, and the authorities started to pay more attention. By the time that of the empire, we already have a huge steel plant that works with the coal. We have a very starting the basics for the development of a new economy. What happens at the end of the empire is this decline on slavery. We have the slavery ending in 1882, but there is a gradual decline from 1870, and laws are going to be approved. Just for you to remember, in 1888 we have the abolition of slavery. In 1889, also as a result of the abolition, there was already a movement against the monarchy in Brazil. And in 1888, after the abolition of slavery, some of the conservatives that were pro-monarchy went against the government, against the princes, and decided to support the military coup that ended the empire in Brazil. So in 1889, Brazil becomes a republic. There is this military coup, and the the emperor and his entire family is invited to live by there, seems like right now, and they moved to Portugal, later on to France. And military committee or military junta, we call junta, assume the power, and then they are going to choose a general to be the president of Brazil. As a result of that, we had a new constitution, which extended the right to vote to all literate citizens, no racial discrimination. So even the recently freed enslaved person could become a voter. Laws to control the lower class population because there was this backlash of freedom in which you have vagrant laws. Barbados also had that happen in many places where they want to control the population of color, and the criminalization of people of color. So anything that they could do could become something against the law, and they were punished, prison or lashes, things like that. People of color face discrimination, poverty, and marginality, and the elite at the same time would maintain their status. A new middle class of civil servants and military people and business owners were rising. This is 1890s. You have a great urbanization of Brazil, the arrival of immigrants, lots of European immigrants would arrive in Brazil from 1870s. Marcos' family comes before that. He told me that next time. But what that created was the discrimination of Black people and competition. So there was less job for Black people, less housing for Black people, as white people were given preference. And this is a photo of the favelas. Black people started to build the way they could, like squatters, in close to urban areas where they could work. At the same time, you have some development in which people were creating uh, some industries. So you have, I'm gonna go faster. Yeah, you have this economic diversity that was created by urbanization. So railroads, steamships, public and private schools were created, the electrification of cities, so public electricity, modernization of ports that had to make space for different kinds of ship, telegraph. Brazil is huge, so there was also an effort to integrate the entire territory through railroads, through the fluvial system, the river systems, and telegraph. a strong middle class start to push for reform. So all these different things of modernization created um, positions that were in the middle class, positions of work. So now the society is starting to change, not from the planters class and the people that work in agriculture, but now is creating classes that work in other kinds of services in rural areas also, but mainly in urban areas. Those classes start to push for reforms. And labor organization also start to get organized. You have strikes and riots of um, workers from the docks, from the trams, workers from different organizations and also manufacturers. They were also some struggle to extend the rights to vote to women. So Brazil at the turn of the century was kind of agitated.
Uh, Elaine, can I interrupt you? So
Yes,
something interesting you mentioned in the previous slide is Brazil was constructing railroads, and a lot of people don't imagine that. But what is interesting is like usually huge countries like Russia, China, or the whole European continent or the US, they have railroads, and we had them as well. Um, but the problem was that in the 50s and 60s, diesel became so cheap that Brazil decided to go for the model of the roads. So today, a lot of the goods in Brazil are transported by trucks and passengers either by plane or by bus, sometimes 12, 24 hours by bus from the north of Brazil down to the southeast or something like that. And little by little now we are bringing back railroads, but it's mainly for cargo, it's not for passengers. So this is something strange for a huge country like we are. They practically in the 50s and 60s dismantled the railroads that were built at the beginning of the century. And people sometimes do not imagine that we can travel like from Porto Alegre in the south of Brazil to Salvador da Bahia by bus, and it takes 2 days or 3 days by bus to go there because there are no
well,
railroads, right?
but we must to remember that the bus system in Brazil works better than in any other country because we
Well, it
created a
has,
system of
yeah,
highways and we call what we call those it would be in the United States called something like a rest station, but it's not. It's much more. It's a huge infrastructure with restaurants and bathrooms and telephones and gas pump. So you have a system that works even if people have to travel 30 hours or even more. The
yeah.
system that and also the way they develop the buses, the comfort of the bus is more, many of those buses are more comfortable than flights, than airplanes. So
Yeah,
it is
that's right. Yeah, so that's right. I was not saying that we don't have a good system. Obviously, the bus system is very efficient, and it has to be because one of the systems has to work, right? But
yeah,
just as
yeah.
as a curiosity that we don't have like railways that would transport passengers and things like that. It's very sometimes you have some old stretches that work as a tourist
Yeah.
train or something, but not really daily passenger system. So that's all done by bus for that reason. So I just wanted to mention that
All right.
when you mentioned the construction of railways. Yeah.
Okay, so back to the turn of the 20th century. This is a time where we didn't have labor legislation. Labor legislation in this hemisphere it started in 1917 in Mexico, but Brazil will only get this type of legislation at the end of the 1930s and the early 1940s. So at the early 20th century, you have legislation that allowed for women and children to work long hours and children as young as 7 years old. Basically, the same type of exploitation of labor force that people in England faced 1 century before, and they fought against that. So but also you have the manufacturing system in places like São Paulo gave preference to the white immigrants because they have a very large number. As in Rio de Janeiro, they would kind of balance and employ some blacks and some whites. But in São Paulo was mostly white people that were employed as workers at the manufacturers, as they thought that black people were not adaptable to modern technology, which is not true. Anyway, at this point that we need more sources of energy, Brazil was also finding, working with new natural resources and doing even some experience with hydroelectricity already since the end of the 19th century, and starting to look for more sources of coal and more ways to generate energy. And also to have some, for example, the rubber industry that will come as a boom in the northern part of Brazil would create the infrastructure for the industry of cars that would come later. So during this last century, that was the 20th century, and effectively from the Getúlio Vargas administration, which is 1930, Brazil invested in infrastructure like the construction of large dams to generate electricity from waters, from the movement of water, the development of steel mills that also would create infrastructure for industry, industrial mining, because before the mining, even all the way to the end of the 20th century, still have some gold mines that would work with the very, what do you say, crafty, very manual work. But you have industrial mining as well. Petroleum that was discovered, and a very strong system of communication. The development and increase of military force as well will come. In 1930s, you have the development, what we call the Companhia Siderúrgica Nacional, which is the Brazilian National Steel Plant. This is very important to create the steel needed for construction and for industry in Brazil, and it's going to be key in the development of the car industry in Brazil. And Brazil also exports steel. Petroleum also was found at that time. It was during the Vargas government that they were already doing some research, and they found petroleum. And they immediately, following the example of the Constitution of Mexico in 1917, the petroleum, together with all mineral sources in Brazil, were declared property of the nation. So it cannot be explored by private. It has to be national company, like nationalized. These are some of the products that we have. This is iron ore. These are the precious and semi-precious stones. We have all sorts of stones, and gold has some silver, but not so important. In the 1940s, Brazil started to, let me just say something. In 1914, a Brazilian guy was the first one to fly an airplane. The Watts, I think the name is Watts, né? The brothers, the Wright brothers, sorry, the Wright brothers, they created a patent, but the first experiment flying with an object that was heavier than air was a Brazilian guy. And Brazilians are very proud that they invented airplanes. Many people are doing research on that and experiments. But anyway, at the end, in the 1950s, Brazil started to build airplanes. And the industry becomes one of the most important up till today. The industrialization also came in the end of the 1950s. Well, in the 40s, Brazil was already producing some cars during the Vargas government from the national manufacturer of cars. But that was in the next decade, in the 1950s, substituted by branches of companies like General Motors and Volkswagen and Ford, for example, some examples of those companies. And it's very interesting because the nationalistic speech created a representation because those are foreign companies profiting in Brazil from the cheap labor force and the resources that Brazil had to produce cars, which is energy, water, and steel. But nevertheless, the government there created a huge propaganda and changed the name. Instead of General Motors in Brazil, it became General Motors of Brazil. So Brazil takes ownership in the General Motors they made there. And we did that with other companies that came after, like Fiat or Honda now, and other many other car companies that are,
Volks,
are
Volkswagen is also
assuming
called Volkswagen do Brasil.
yeah, so Volkswagen do Brasil, so of Brazil. Volkswagen do Brasil, Ford do Brasil, General Motors do Brasil. Um, this is a big deal for the foreign companies, but it's also marking the arrival of multinational companies that are going to dominate the industrialization in Brazil from the 1950s. This is Volkswagen do Brasil, as Marcos said. We produce lots of this. We call Fusca. In the south, they call Fuca. It's the Volkswagen Beetle. And the Volkswagen one we call Perua, which is means Turkey. But we have a nickname for everybody. We have a car called Go. It's a Volkswagen called Go. I forgot the name in English of this thing, similar Volkswagen.
Well, in Germany, the goal is called Golf, uh,
So,
but it's adapted to Brazil, of course, because of our football, right?
so in 1960s, 50s to 60s, this company starts to be more and more. We had a dictatorship that was Vargas dictatorship. As let me go back to show you Vargas again. Vargas dictatorship. This is the Vargas dictatorship. Create the basics for the national industry. We already have some industrialization, but he created the base for the infrastructure. Another dictatorship, this time the military dictatorship, opened their country to companies, multinational companies, now not only cars, but multinational companies like Nestle or Kodak or Panasonic. All those companies were invited to come to Brazil. The idea was Brazil would create this industrial park and generate lots of jobs, and that it would increase the middle class and the level of development. So it was a way to develop the economy in Brazil. This is Honda, by the way. At the same
Can I
time,
can I come in with my side comments, Elaine, if you
yes,
don't mind? As you see
no,
there, the Honda picture there is like they are producing the 2 millionth motorbike, and it's written Flex underneath. This is something interesting in Brazil. So even motorbikes and all cars in Brazil, they have a so-called flex engine. That means you can drive it on ethanol or on gasoline or on any mixture of it. And also, let me complement to what you said, hydropower, right, earlier. So while the world is talking about renewable energy, Brazil has a heavy hydropower system for producing, obviously, electricity and increasingly wind and solar power. So over 80% of what we produce in terms of electricity in Brazil is renewable already. So other countries have like a target 30% renewable or something, or half of it renewable. We already have renewable energy for a long time, and that also includes ethanol, because our gasoline also has ethanol in it. Your camera is moving, Elaine.
Yes.
And also when it comes to airplanes, you said uh, we produce airplanes, and just to put it in context, the two biggest airplane manufacturers in the world are Boeing and Airbus, and number three and number four are the Canadian Bombardier in Brazil and Embraer. So we are amongst the top four airplane producers in the world. Yes. Okay. So enough of my comments.
So this is the next slide. We showed the production of we call alcohol, which is ethanol. The vehicles produced in Brazil with ethanol, powered by ethanol, and the development of ethanol industry. The development of this industry, the 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 alcohol or ethanol made of sugarcane, it started in the 1970s. So there was all those projects for development, including the build of the a major highway that would cut the Amazon and facilitate the the movement of minerals that were taken from the Amazon, and also the movement of people. Uh, um, Also a project of colonization of this rainforest area. All of this gives the Brazilian this idea of development because it was generating wealth and creating jobs. And that is behind what is behind today's speech in favor of a military dictatorship, because that comes at the time of a dictatorship. However, the military dictatorship is just was just let's say a circumstance in which that this type of development happened, because that is the period in which the capital is becoming more international and the transnational capital or multinational company are developing in the world. So it's not because Brazilian was a dictatorship that that was created. However, because it was a dictatorship, the system or the way those companies, these same companies, arrived in Brazil was not discussed, because people did not know exactly what would be the impact, the environmental impact, for example, or what would be the taxation impact, for example, because there was cuts in taxation. And the military also worked in a way to control the working class, to prevent strikes, and that kept salaries lower. All right. But even with the salaries kept lower than what would be in their headquarters, in the headquarters of Nestle or in the headquarters of Panasonic or Kodak, even paying lower salaries, those salaries paid, and now I'm going to bring my own experience on that because I worked at Panasonic. The salary that I received in Panasonic was much higher than the salary that I received in a textile company that was a Brazilian company. So there was this also this vision that it was progress when the multinational company came. So that's part of the speech of some people that were, oh, the military was better. The Brazilian economy today is still diversified. We have still producing coffee, still produce sugar cane, we're still producing cachaça, which is our rum, we're still producing sugar. The sugar that is consumed in Brazil is produced in Brazil. Cocoa that we export, also we also export coffee, we also export sugar, we also export cotton, and but we have a textile industry that also uses our cotton. Unfortunately, we're still exporting lumber, and for those who are, oh my goodness, the rainforest and blah blah blah, it should be preserved. Yes, it should, and you all should start buying um, furniture made of steel. Okay, because if you defend the rainforest and you go to buy a very nice wooden dining set. So you are being just hypocritical. Sorry. But not you, somebody that you know, probably, or somebody that's not even your friend. We also produce food like rice and beans and all those things that we produce a lot. And we have other products like oils made of babasu. We used to have peanut oils. Maybe we're coming back with that. Corn oil. So many things are made in Brazil. We have the nuts, the production of nuts. They are not called Brazilian nuts in Brazil. They have different names. We produce tobacco a lot, and we have the companies that produce cigarettes in Brazil. Still producing rubber up to now, and we have, of course, the production of beef, cattle, and soybeans, and all the minerals that we're still producing, still finding until the end of the 20th century, still finding new reserves of gold to be explored in Brazil. Since 1998, there was new approach for economic development. We moved away from military dictatorship in 1995, and so 1998 is a democratic government, president elected, and everything. Since then, Brazil has invested in economic exchange with nations like Africa, Asian, and other American countries, because before Brazil was focusing in economic exchange mainly with what we call the developed world, which is Europe and the United States, a little bit Canada. But since 1998, there was this promotion of South economy, which is not exactly South-South because it involves China and other areas that are not exactly South. But is the idea of investment in economies that were peripheral to those considered first world. Of course, the idea of what is central and what is peripheral changed in the past century. So talk about 1998, because in 1998, China was not included. Okay, now China is included as developed world. Social policies to fight poverty and investments in education and research and health programs have also proved to be beneficial to the economy, like scholarships for education and research, and the expansion of research centers that Brazil has. One good example is the Instituto Butantan, which exists for a long time, more than 100 years. But the Instituto Butantan is a research center for biochemistry that produces lots of medicines and produces vaccine in Brazil. And during the pandemic of COVID, it was very important for producing the vaccine in Brazil. In the last years, Brazil has also improved the support to small and medium-sized business, which gave people the opportunity to start their own entrepreneurship. So comparing now in 2005, sorry, the performance of Brazil and China. So Brazil was ahead of China in the GDP in 1991. Of course, China gave a huge, what do you call? We'll say salto. Sometimes I forget the word. Leap.
Huge jump or
A huge leap,
growth.
and
Okay.
it went to from 574 to more than 4 billion. Uh, um, 4,000 billion. I don't know what's the name. So, okay. So you see the huge growing of China in this area. Brazil is now also focusing since the 1990s in agreements and cooperation with CONOSUL. The CONOSUL would be Paraguay, Argentina, and Uruguay, but the agreement also includes Bolivia and also is extending to Chile, but Chile was not very keen in working this. So the first idea was to create a common market like CARICOM, and it works. It works now, and it was extended to other parts of South America, in which it facilitates the commerce and the transit of people between those countries. The economy is still growing a lot. We had some crises. We have a few crises. We had the miracle in the 1970s when the economy jumped with the investments of foreign companies and the growth in the working class, and especially a middle class among the blue collars. I mean, the working class also. That the demand also, I want just to emphasize that the demand for uh, skilled workers, for that, or specialized workers, for those manufacturers, for those industries, made Brazil create um, institute or that was to give education directed to those industries. So it was a different kind of education. It was not the academic education, but the education for profession. And that was what made Lula, because Lula had very few years of scholar education, but he was, as a young teenager, he was accepted in one of those schools, and he becomes a metal worker, specialized at metal worker, and then he would rise to be the president of the labor union for metal workers in São Paulo, which is the strongest one in Brazil. Anyway, so during this period, you have the development of other things like the exploitation of natural gas. We did not explore natural gas before, but then it was proved that was a very good thing. That was also the period when Brazil found uranium, which is used in the new economy that was coming in the last quarter of the century. We also were doing some other experience with renewable sources and oil derivatives. There were always something negative about the energy matters, but the fact that Brazil created a diversity in the sources of energy, it gave Brazil certain stability and made it more attractive for foreign companies to come and work in Brazil because energy is cheaper. So here is
Lainey, I feel, yes, sorry. Now I feel the need to explain here now, because earlier I said that 80% of our electricity is renewable, and here we see the graphic that renewable is 44.7%, but this is for the whole matrix, right? So that includes cars and everything. So I was referring to the production of electricity only earlier. Okay, but even still, you see there, Brazil has almost half of its matrix is renewable, whereas the world is just 2.2%.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. So it is very attractive and is important for a stable development, economic development. Well, in the past 2 decades, Brazil expanded a lot in the exploitation of oil and gas inland and at the coastal area. So it was a very important move because we created what we call polos, which are centers that are developing and exploring natural gas or petroleum. So in the interior, we have natural gas, and then in the coastal area, we have petroleum. The steel mill continues to be very, very important, and we are competing with China, but it's said that Brazilian steel is of better quality. And also China also buys from us. The industrial production of Brazil, and these are numbers for 10 years ago, they are like this. São Paulo the São Paulo state, not the city of São Paulo, produces almost 70% of the total because was a industrial polo for more than 100 years. Then second, you have Minas Gerais, which is here. Rio Grande do Sul is also very important. Then comes Paraná. Rio de Janeiro is a very small state. So Rio de Janeiro is 2% with less industries because Rio de Janeiro is very small state in comparison to other states, okay? And also the sources of energy in Rio is less. The port for export in Rio is very important. We have one in São Paulo, one in Rio, and another one in the Northeast. But in terms of industrial production is less. What we have Volkswagen, Ford, Fiat, Honda, Renault, General Motors. Some of this, Ford, for example, left Brazil last year, but we don't know if it's coming back. There was economic issues, and some of these companies just emigrated from Brazil. Now, with the return of Lula, we are hopeful that some of those companies are coming back. But also, Ford was facing a problem in themselves. The company has problems. But Brazil is number 6 in production of cars. We are number 1 in production of shoes. And we have the production of shoes also in São Paulo state is very large. One of our major products of export is the Havaiana sandals that goes to the entire world, but also shoes. I was in Mexico 3 weeks ago and I need to buy a shoe. And when I went there, I found a Brazilian brand that I know. I said, okay, I know this. I'm going to buy this. So I was in Mexico City buying Brazilian shoes. You can buy Brazilian shoes here sometimes. We also export one of the important industries, the fashion industry. And in fashion industry, we also export the models, the top models. Hydroelectricity is still a very important alternative in source of energy. We generate electricity from the use of water in a way that creates the dam and then creates the waterfall and canalize the energy generated by this waterfall, the movement of the water to a system of transmission, produce electricity and then transmit it. These lines of transmission can be found in the entire country. Almost 80% of the energy generated by Brazil is generated by Brazil is consumed domestically, and in the house or commercially originates from hydro plants. We also export hydroelectricity to Paraguay. We still having all these minerals being produced, and bauxite, for example, and manganese, together with iron. These are very important. Cassiterite, also important for industry. So to make different things, they use this industry. The stones are also still very important. They are also part of our exports. We still have diamonds and tourmalines and aquamarines. We have diamond being explored in Brazil since the 18th century, since the 17th something. We have diamonds, but every now and then we find another mine of diamonds or gold. So that creates in Brazil very important resources. Brazil has lots of resources. Let me stop sharing. And one of the questions is why Brazil faces crisis, economic crisis every now and then, if we have all these natural resources, if we have the people, if we have the energy. And the reason is that with the great part of the economy devoted to export, Brazil becomes very vulnerable to the movements of the international market. That is a major thing in Brazil. Also, we we depend on certain um, insumes or support from the government. Even in an economy that is modern, you need the input of the state to regulate the market. Like, for example, to regulate the production of food in Brazil, so we don't need to import food, or to regulate the level of taxes that are to export certain merchandise, and also the production of petroleum and how it is. Part of the crisis is also generated by the political system, which creates is pluripartidary, that would think that because we have dozens of political parties, it seems more democratic, but it's not, because you have to create too many political agreements in order to govern. And those political agreements often result in corruption and issues like that. But if we compare from the beginning of the Republican period, which is 1890, to so 100 years, 130 years, we definitely grew, not only because we found other natural resources, but because in one way or another, we created a very strong intermediate classes. I'm going to talk more than one class of workers that can support the economy. So, for example, during the pandemic, the economy was hit heavily, was difficult. But the internal economy sustained the market because we did not need the tourists to rely to continue the development of economy. So the internal consume could rely on that. The other thing is that in the past, especially in the past 3 decades, Brazil has faced, looking at the face of their own racism, and started to create from the state, through the universities, and also through a massive campaign that also affected private companies, systems of quotas or affirmative actions. But especially in developing the quotas in academic environment, we managed to, we did not erase racism or racial discrimination that would impact in the economy, but we are much better now. We are much better now. And the campaigns to eliminate illiteracy and to promote, to avoid the students to drop out of schools also. So it is improving by improving their population. But right now, at this moment, maybe Marco is going to help me. Brazil is completely divided. There is a group that believes that Lula is the communist and is going to put the, the country at risk. What happened during the government of Lula and the PT was a huge development. What happened right after was a huge crisis. But the development that we achieved in Lula government was also social development that created, that's what gave him the victory in this new election. But it was basically 50-50%. So you have another group that is very conservative, that misses having a maid, because the the emphasis and reinforcing laws that gave rights to domestic workers, for example, was only done during the PT. Domestic workers in Brazil lived in very precarious situation with very little rights, and only in PT they extended the workers' right, all the labor legislation to domestic workers. Middle class hated that because they liked to have a maid working from them from 6 in the morning to 10 in the evening. And that was very common in urban centers like Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, and others. Other thing that this groups that opposes Lula, they don't like the idea of social, what they think is a socialism policies, but what they think is socialism policies is not exactly communism. Is the expansion of the health service that they also use, but they don't know that they use. It's like in the United States, the extension of the the educational system, public system. Brazilian universities free for all, like free for payment, free, completely free. And other things that are social gains and that put at risk the privileged. Remember the last part, the last time I talked to you, I said Brazil changed a lot to keep the same structure, same social and political structure. What happened in the past 30 years is that that structure was shaken and we have a different things. So I'm going to end my talking here and we open to questions or Marcus comment because he also following Brazil political issues and we keep on. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Rocha, for this presentation. Uh, I don't know if I will comment. I think you covered it mostly, but it's exactly, this is also the historical struggle of Brazil that people that have privileges don't want to give them up, and they are afraid of others when they get privileges, as if not every citizen would be entitled to have the same rights. So, as you rightly said in your previous presentation, a lot changed to remain same. I will not forget that for sure. So, but I will open the floor here to our um, people that are watching here today live. So, do you have any comments, any questions regarding this presentation or in general?
Hi, good evening. Paul Blackman here. Sorry I'm late. I, as always, caught the end of what seems to be an excellent presentation. Um, so I came in at the point where you mentioned that right now the country seems to be split 50-50. You have the conservatives on one hand, you've got the people who support Lula on the other. Um, do you anticipate any real tension? I saw recently that the Bolsonaro had appealed, and the election court had said that the result was, as far as you could see, a fair one. So therefore, he not only has no standing, but he was also fined, meaning he had to pay all the costs and so on. Do you think that there'll be any kind of tension afterwards? Is Bolsonaro going to call out his friends in the army to, to take over? I mean, what's it like on the ground in terms of people's feelings?
Okay, people's feelings is one thing, facts is another thing. It's something else. Oh. So let's go to facts about this idea of military intervention first. Those calling for military intervention, they ignore or choose to ignore the fact that when Brazil had a military dictatorship was a period of the Cold War, and the United States and England, especially these two major powers, they were supporting dictatorships not only in Latin America but all over the world as a way to curb the advance of communism. By doing that, they invested lots of money in Brazil. So not only money in the economy, but money in the military industry, money that also was like, for example, donating a warship or donating, or even providing, they did that to the entire Latin America, providing training for officials. So there was a lot of capital that was transferred from these nations to South America, especially South America. This doesn't exist anymore. This doesn't exist anymore. The United States is not offering any money. England is not offering. England is like, try to cover their parts with their own hand because England is basically naked in terms of economic at this point. So there is no money coming from outside. And in fact, all the military development that we had during the military dictatorship was owned a lot to external input of capital. So the influx of external capital in Brazil financial this development, but we don't have that anymore. We don't have. We also don't have an environment, international environment that would accept this kind of move in Brazil. Okay, Brazil is much larger than Venezuela, so it's much more difficult to have a coup and then control the entire country because the territory is huge. And as I said, it's 50-50. This last move of the political party to which Bolsonaro belongs, asking for the election to be declared illegal. It was very laughable because our election is made in two terms, yeah? First and then second. We have two sets to get the election. So you have a first election and then the two that receives more votes goes for a second one. But the first one, which was in October, elected lots of senators and members of Congress. Do you want to declare this election illegal? You're going to lose all those representatives that you have elected, including governors, including other types of other levels of the organization. So, of course, the political party did not accept that. And that was the end of the petition. See? But I am confident that all these heated manifestations are going to come to an end because the country is going to start to move. There is no way that we could stay all the time up in arms. We cannot have that. So I am confident there is a minority making lots of noise, not accepting the results, but it's not everybody. Maybe Marco has a different opinion.
Yeah, thank
No,
you.
we are the country of football, right? And it's a bit like the behavior is a bit like a football game. You lost the game, but you still want to play another 20 minutes to see if you can score, or you blame the referee. That's a little bit what is happening. And I hope, and I'm pretty sure the democratic um, institutions are working in Brazil, and you cannot simply play another 20 minutes extra time because you want to score another goal, but you lost the game already. So yeah, so let's see what happens. Anyone else has any comment, any question? No? Okay, so that is it then for today. Len, I see you are there. So next week we have scheduled our Caribbean specialist on Brazilian music that compared Brazilian music, Brazilian samba with Caribbean music. He will, unless anything happens from now to next Thursday, he will be here with us to present on that and to make especially you happy, okay? Yes, Glenn.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear that, because I've seen a lot of similarities between our music and Brazilian music, and it's all in the rhythm, the clave rhythm. The clave rhythm travels from Africa to the Caribbean and back, and the Brazilian form of it in samba or semba is just amazing. And then as they went into the other forms of Brazilian music, it's just beautiful. But one thing that I want to say to Dr. Rocha, my favorite tree is the ipe. We call it the pui in the Caribbean. And it's a Brazilian tree. It happens to be a Brazilian tree, the ipe amarillo. And it is just a tree that sheds its leaves and put out a plume of beautiful yellow flowers at a specific time of year. It gets very large, but it is just beauty. Just to drive by and see a pui tree, it is amazing. It just lifts your spirit just to see a beautiful Brazilian pui tree. Thank you.
Thank you. It's beautiful.
We have the We have the Ipe Amarela and we have the Ipe Rocha, which is the purple one.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
We have avenues made of ipe side by side, different places.
Wow. I would love to see pictures of those. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, my friends, so if no other comments, thank you again, Dr. Rocha, for being here with us 3 times in this series. So we learned a lot about Brazilian history with you. And I hope we all have now a better idea about Brazilian history. So that's it for today. I thank you all for being here and I say ciao and see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.